While many Nigerians are already watching the slow build-up to the 2027 elections, a quieter political struggle is unfolding inside one of the country's smaller but increasingly talked about opposition parties. The African Democratic Congress was once viewed by several political figures as a possible meeting ground, a platform where politicians from different camps could quietly regroup and build a new coalition before the next election cycle. But today, the party finds itself caught in a deep internal crisis. There are rival meetings, competing claims to leadership, court filings and counter-statements, and behind it all, a growing suspicion among party insiders that something larger may be unfolding in Nigeria's political space. Multiple factions now claim authority inside the party. Different leaders are speaking for different camps, and some party figures are openly warning that powerful political interests may be attempting to weaken the party before the next national election. The tension is not just about titles or party offices. It touches something deeper in Nigeria's political culture: the struggle for influence, regional balance, and ideological identity. Because in Nigerian politics, the strength or weakness of opposition parties can shape the entire direction of national politics. So, the question slowly rising beneath the surface is simple but important. Is the African Democratic Congress simply facing another internal disagreement? Or is this crisis part of a much larger political battle that could reshape Nigeria's opposition landscape before 2027? Before the story goes deeper, the narrator pauses briefly. If this is the first time the audience is joining the channel, they are welcome to Naija Update 24/7, a platform focused on explaining the political events shaping Nigeria's future. Then the narration continues. Because to understand the confusion inside the ADC, it is important to step back and examine how this situation began. The current crisis did not appear overnight. For much of the past year, the African Democratic Congress had quietly attracted attention from political actors searching for alternative political platforms. Nigeria's political history shows that alliances often shift before major elections. Politicians study the landscape carefully, looking for structures that can support future ambitions. Some observers believe the ADC could become one of those structures, a neutral political home capable of hosting a coalition of opposition figures. Discussions reportedly took place in different political circles about strengthening the party ahead of the next election cycle. Among the names frequently mentioned in those conversations were experienced political figures like David Mark, a former Senate president known for his long experience in Nigeria's legislative politics. Another name that appeared in these discussions was Ralph Aregbesola, the former governor of Osun State and a prominent figure in the southwest political space. Both men carry political weight, and their presence in any political conversation naturally draws attention. For some observers, their involvement suggested that the ADC might evolve into something larger than its previous electoral performance. But as often happens in Nigerian political parties, ambition and uncertainty soon began to collide. By early 2026, internal tensions started to appear. At first, the disagreements were subtle: questions about leadership structure, party direction, and future strategy. But soon, those disagreements became more visible. A major dispute emerged over a fundamental issue: who actually controls the party leadership? One faction recognized the leadership structure that had emerged during earlier efforts to reorganize the party and prepare it for possible coalition discussions. Another group rejected that arrangement. Instead, they announced a different leadership direction under Nafiu Bala Gombe. Supporters of this move argued that the party needed new leadership energy, but the central leadership quickly rejected the announcement. They insisted that the individual in question had previously been expelled from the party and could not legitimately assume such a role. What began as a disagreement quickly turned into a full-blown leadership confrontation. Statements were issued, counter-statements followed, and soon the political atmosphere inside the party became tense. Different factions began organizing their own meetings. Separate gatherings were announced in different cities. In some cases, rival conventions were planned by competing groups within the same party. At the state level, the confusion spread further. In places like Adamawa and other chapters, different individuals began claiming the same party positions: two chairmen, two executives, two narratives about who truly represents the party. For ordinary observers, the situation began to look chaotic. But for those familiar with Nigerian politics, the pattern was not entirely surprising. Political parties often experience intense internal struggles during periods of realignment, and the closer the country moves towards a major election cycle, the more those struggles tend to intensify. Still, one question continued to linger. Why is this crisis happening now? Why would a party that was being considered as a potential coalition platform suddenly fall into internal conflict just as national political calculations are beginning for 2027? To answer that question, it is necessary to understand how Nigerian political parties actually function behind the scenes. On paper, party structures appear straightforward. There are national executive committees responsible for overall leadership. There are state chapters that organize activities at the regional level. There are conventions where delegates gather to make key decisions, and there are internal disciplinary systems designed to manage conflicts. But in practice, Nigerian political parties can be far more complex. Authority is not always determined only by party constitutions. It can also be influenced by political alliances, regional power networks, and legal interpretations. This is where institutions outside the party often become involved. One of the most important institutions in this process is the Independent National Electoral Commission, the body responsible for regulating elections and recognizing political parties. When leadership disputes occur inside a party, the Electoral Commission often faces a delicate situation. It must determine which leadership structure is legitimate while also respecting the outcomes of internal party processes and court rulings. But the Electoral Commission rarely moves quickly in these situations. Instead, it often waits for the courts to clarify legal questions before formally recognizing leadership changes. That delay can create uncertainty, and uncertainty can weaken a political party's ability to organize effectively. In the case of the ADC, legal arguments are already beginning to shape the conflict. Different factions have referenced court actions and legal filings to support their claims. Each group insists it holds legitimate authority. This creates what political analysts often describe as parallel legitimacy claims. One group argues that internal party structures give them authority. Another group points to legal processes and alternative political support. The result is a confusing political environment where supporters, party members, and observers struggle to determine which leadership structure will ultimately prevail. Meanwhile, time continues to move toward the next election cycle. When leadership disputes drag on for months or years, political parties often find themselves unable to focus on their larger goals. Policy development slows down, grassroots mobilization becomes difficult, potential allies become cautious, and public confidence begins to fade. But beyond these institutional complications, the deeper political question remains. Who benefits from this instability? That question is rarely simple in Nigerian politics. Some analysts argue that internal ambition may be the driving force. Within every political party are individuals who believe they can lead the organization in a different direction. Leadership contests, therefore, can emerge naturally from competing visions. Others believe the situation reflects the complicated process of building opposition coalitions. When different political actors attempt to unite under one platform, disagreements over control and strategy can easily arise. And then there is another possibility that some party figures quietly raise: the idea that powerful political interests outside the party may have incentives to see the opposition divided. No clear evidence proves such claims, but the suspicion itself reflects the deep mistrust that often characterizes Nigeria's political environment. For now, the reality is this: the African Democratic Congress stands at a crossroads. What once appeared to be a potential meeting ground for opposition politics is now struggling to maintain internal unity. The coming months will determine whether the party can resolve its leadership disputes and rebuild a coherent structure, or whether the crisis will deepen, reshaping the political calculations of many actors preparing for the next national contest. Because in Nigerian politics, moments like this rarely remain isolated. They often become the early signs of larger political shifts that only become clear much later. And as the country slowly moves toward the defining political battles of 2027, the struggle unfolding inside the ADC may prove to be far more significant than it first appears. The tension inside the African Democratic Congress does not exist in a vacuum. In Nigerian politics, party crises often connect to deeper strategic calculations unfolding across the entire political landscape. What appears at first glance to be a disagreement about leadership titles can quietly reflect a much larger contest for power. Because every political structure in Nigeria, no matter how small, represents potential influence ahead of the next election cycle. And influence in Nigerian politics is rarely ignored. Since the conclusion of the 2023 Nigerian presidential election, the country has entered a familiar phase of political recalculation. The election delivered victory to Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the candidate of the All Progressives Congress. It was a fiercely contested race that revealed deep political divisions across the country. Yet, elections in Nigeria rarely mark the end of political maneuvering. Instead, they begin the long, quiet process of preparing for the next contest. Inside the ruling party, attention has naturally shifted toward protecting its political dominance. Governing coalitions must maintain unity, manage regional expectations, and keep their political networks intact. But outside the ruling structure, opposition parties face a different challenge. They must find ways to organize themselves into credible alternatives. That process is rarely smooth. Nigeria's opposition landscape has historically struggled with fragmentation. Different political actors carry different ambitions. Different regions hold different expectations. And when those forces attempt to unite under a single political platform, tension often follows. This is where the situation inside the ADC becomes especially significant. For months, the party had been quietly mentioned in conversations about possible opposition realignment, not necessarily as a dominant party on its own, but as a potential coalition vehicle, a platform that could host political actors from different backgrounds who were searching for a new political home. In theory, this idea offered several advantages. The ADC already had national registration. It possessed existing party structures across states. And unlike larger parties weighed down by factional history, it appeared flexible enough to absorb new alliances. But this possibility also introduced a delicate question. If the ADC were to become a coalition platform, who would control it? That question sits at the heart of many political conflicts. Control of a party structure means control of its ticket, control of its candidate selection, control of its negotiating power in alliances. In Nigerian politics, those controls carry enormous value, which is why internal leadership struggles often intensify precisely when coalition discussions begin. Political scientists sometimes describe this as the pre-alliance conflict phase. It is the moment when different political actors try to position themselves before a larger alliance takes shape. Inside the ADC, several forces may now be colliding at once. One layer involves simple leadership competition. Political parties naturally attract individuals who believe they can lead them more effectively. Some figures inside the party may see the current moment as an opportunity to shape the party's direction. Another layer involves disagreement over strategy. Should the ADC remain a small but independent party with its own identity, or should it transform into a broad coalition platform for opposition alliances ahead of 2027? These two visions are not easily reconciled. An independent party maintains control over its structure and ideology. A coalition platform, on the other hand, must accommodate multiple interests, and accommodation often requires negotiation over leadership roles. Beyond these strategic debates lies another powerful force that has shaped Nigerian politics for decades: regional balance. Nigeria's political system operates within an unwritten but deeply understood framework of regional power distribution. Northern political blocs maintain strong electoral influence through population strength. Southwest political networks hold significant organizational power and financial resources. The Middle Belt represents a complex political zone whose alliances can shift the national balance. When leadership struggles appear inside a political party, these regional dynamics often sit quietly in the background. Different factions may attract support from different regional networks, not always openly, but through subtle signals of alignment and loyalty. And then there are the figures rarely mentioned in official party statements, the silent power brokers. These are influential individuals who operate outside formal party offices but maintain deep political networks, former office holders, political financiers, regional kingmakers. Their influence rarely appears on official documents, yet their role in shaping party outcomes can be profound. They encourage negotiations, they sponsor meetings, they advise factions on strategy. Sometimes they quietly mediate conflicts, other times they allow disputes to unfold if the outcome serves a broader political goal. For ordinary citizens watching from the outside, these dynamics can feel distant and abstract, but they shape the reality of how Nigerian politics functions. And history offers an important lesson. Many of Nigeria's most intense party conflicts have occurred not during elections, but during the quiet years between them. This is the period when alliances are negotiated, when political actors reposition themselves, when parties attempt to redefine their role before the next national contest. The current tension inside the ADC may simply be another example of this pattern, but it also raises a larger question about Nigeria's democratic system. Because the stability of political parties plays a crucial role in any functioning democracy. Strong opposition parties help ensure that elections remain competitive. They challenge government policies. They present alternative visions for national development. When opposition parties become weakened by internal conflict, the balance of democratic debate can shift. Without strong opposition voices, policy discussions often become narrower, government decisions face fewer structured challenges, parliamentary debates lose some of their competitive energy. Public confidence can also suffer. For many citizens, political parties are already viewed with skepticism. Years of political defections and factional struggles have created a perception that parties sometimes serve elite ambitions more than public interests. When internal crises dominate headlines, that perception can deepen. Voters begin to wonder whether political competition is truly about ideas or simply about power. And when that question lingers too long, another consequence can emerge: political disengagement. If citizens feel that political parties are fragmented or ineffective, some may lose motivation to participate in elections. Turnout declines. Political discussion becomes more cynical. Yet, political crises do not always lead to decline. In some cases, internal conflicts force parties to confront structural weaknesses. Leadership disputes can trigger reforms. New leadership can emerge. Party constitutions can be clarified. History shows that some parties have emerged stronger after resolving deep internal disagreements. But the timing of that resolution often determines whether recovery is possible. As Nigeria moves gradually toward the next election cycle, the political calendar will begin to tighten. Candidate selection processes, alliance negotiations, regional consultations, all of these processes intensify as elections approach. If a party remains trapped in internal conflict during this period, it risks losing the momentum needed to compete effectively. For the African Democratic Congress, the coming months may prove decisive. The party must decide whether it can restore unity within its structure or whether its internal divisions will continue to widen. But the implications of this crisis extend beyond Nigeria's borders. Around the world, Nigeria's political developments are closely monitored. As Africa's most populous nation and one of its largest economies, the stability of Nigeria's democratic institutions carries international significance. Foreign governments watch Nigerian elections as indicators of democratic resilience in West Africa. Investors monitor political stability when assessing economic risk. And across global media platforms, Nigeria's political narratives often shape broader perceptions of governance across the continent. Nigeria's diaspora adds another dimension to this conversation. Large communities in the United Kingdom, United States, and across Europe remain deeply engaged with political developments at home. Through social media, diaspora organizations, and international media outlets, these communities actively debate Nigeria's political direction. They amplify stories, challenge narratives, and sometimes influence public discussion back inside Nigeria itself. In today's interconnected political environment, even internal party disputes can quickly become part of a global conversation, which means the story unfolding inside the African Democratic Congress is not just a local political drama. It is part of a much larger narrative about the future of Nigeria's democracy. And as the political horizon slowly moves toward 2027, the choices made in moments like this may quietly shape the balance of power long before the next ballot is ever cast. As the political drama inside the African Democratic Congress continues to unfold, The public conversation around the crisis has begun to divide into competing interpretations. Each narrative tries to explain the same set of events, yet each highlights a different truth about how Nigerian politics actually works. One of the most widely discussed explanations focuses on the possibility of external manipulation. Some figures within the party quietly suggest that powerful interests outside the ADC may benefit from weakening the organization before the next national election cycle. Their argument is rooted in a long tradition within Nigerian politics. Opposition parties have often accused dominant political forces of encouraging internal divisions among their rivals. The logic is simple. A fragmented opposition struggles to mount a credible electoral challenge. But proving such claims is difficult. Political influence rarely leaves clear fingerprints. Meetings happen privately, alliances form quietly, and political actors rarely admit to strategies that could damage their public image. For many observers, the theory of external interference reflects something deeper than evidence. It reflects the deep mistrust that exists within Nigeria's political system. Decades of intense political competition have created an environment where suspicion often becomes part of the political narrative itself. But another explanation for the ADC crisis looks inward rather than outward. Some analysts believe the turmoil simply reveals weaknesses within the party's internal structure. Compared with older political organizations, the ADC has historically operated with a smaller institutional footprint. Its national leadership structures have sometimes struggled to maintain consistent authority across state chapters. In political parties, discipline and clarity often determine stability. Without clear communication channels, disputes can escalate quickly. State leaders may interpret party rules differently. Local executives may form alliances that conflict with national directives. When leadership decisions become contested, the lack of strong institutional frameworks can transform minor disagreements into major crises. In this view, the ADC's current situation may not require any hidden conspiracies. It may simply be the result of internal leadership challenges that many young political parties face. Yet a third interpretation introduces a more strategic perspective. Some political observers believe the current conflict could actually be part of a broader process of political realignment. In Nigerian politics, parties sometimes undergo internal restructuring before entering coalition negotiations. Leadership struggles can become a way of redefining the balance of power within a party. Different factions test their strength. Different political actors attempt to secure influence before alliances are finalized. What appears to be chaos on the surface can sometimes represent a deeper political negotiation happening behind closed doors. This perspective does not necessarily suggest that the conflict is carefully planned, but it recognizes that political actors often maneuver aggressively when new opportunities begin to appear on the horizon. And the horizon now includes the next national election. Nigeria's political calendar may still appear distant from the outside, yet experienced political strategists know that preparation for the 2027 Nigerian general election has already begun. Political alliances rarely emerge overnight. They are built slowly, through consultations, through informal agreements, through careful calculations about regional support and electoral math. Within that context, the struggle inside the ADC may represent more than a simple leadership dispute. It may reflect a deeper question about who will control the party if it becomes part of a larger opposition coalition. And history suggests that such moments can reshape political organizations in unexpected ways. Nigerian political parties have sometimes experienced their most dramatic transformations just before major elections. Leadership crises have led to sudden restructurings. Factional struggles have produced new alliances. In some cases, parties that appeared divided and unstable managed to reorganize themselves quickly once a common electoral objective emerged. Political survival can be a powerful motivator. When the stakes become clear, factions that once competed fiercely may suddenly discover reasons to cooperate. But that transformation does not happen automatically. It depends on whether the actors involved are willing to compromise. Which brings the story back to the present moment. Inside the African Democratic Congress, the crisis remains unresolved. Multiple factions continue to assert authority. Legal questions still hover over competing claims to leadership, and political observers across Nigeria are watching closely for signs of the next development. Several possible paths now lie ahead. One potential outcome involves the Nigerian judiciary. When leadership disputes inside political parties become complex, courts are often asked to interpret party constitutions and determine which faction holds legitimate authority. If legal cases surrounding the ADC reach this stage, judges may ultimately clarify the party's leadership structure. Such rulings can bring temporary stability, but they also carry risks. Court decisions sometimes resolve legal questions without resolving political tensions. Factions that lose legal battles may remain dissatisfied. Another possibility is political reconciliation. Behind the scenes, negotiations may already be taking place between different factions. Senior political figures often step in quietly during moments of crisis. They encourage dialogue, they broker compromises, they remind competing leaders that internal conflict can damage the party's long-term prospects. If such negotiations succeed, the ADC could emerge from the crisis with a restructured leadership arrangement acceptable to multiple factions. Yet there is also a darker scenario.
If the current tensions continue to escalate, the party could face fragmentation. Competing factions might choose to separate entirely. Some members could align themselves with other political platforms. Others might attempt to create new alliances outside the existing party structure. Fragmentation has been a recurring theme in Nigeria's political history. Political parties sometimes split under the pressure of competing ambitions. When that happens, the resulting political landscape becomes even more complex. But Nigerian politics also carries another unpredictable characteristic. Today's political conflict can become tomorrow's political partnership. History has repeatedly shown that rivals inside one party can later find themselves working together in a different political formation. Alliances shift, political calculations evolve, personal relationships reshape political strategies. What appears to be the end of one political structure can sometimes become the beginning of another. This fluidity is one of the defining features of Nigeria's democratic system. It creates uncertainty, but it also creates opportunity, which is why the current crisis inside the ADC may hold implications that extend far beyond the party itself, because every political realignment before a major election contributes to the broader national equation. The strength of opposition parties, the balance between regional political blocs, the alliances that ultimately shape the presidential race. All of these elements begin forming years before voters ever step into polling stations. And sometimes, the earliest signals appear in places that initially seem small or peripheral. A leadership dispute, a contested convention, a party struggling to define its future. From these moments, larger political movements can emerge. So, the central question returns. Is the African Democratic Congress simply experiencing another internal leadership crisis, or is this one of the early tremors that will shape Nigeria's political landscape ahead of 2027? The answer may depend on how quickly the party can resolve its internal disagreements, whether it can rebuild unity, and whether it can transform internal competition into a coherent political strategy. Because in Nigerian politics, unity often determines which parties remain relevant in the national conversation and which ones slowly fade from the political stage. If this analysis helped you understand what is really happening behind the headlines, share this story with someone who needs the full picture. And if you want more deep political insights like this, stay connected with Naija Update 24/7, because sometimes the most important political battles begin long before the election campaigns ever start.